My name is William Carter. Welcome to Top 10 Emotional Comeback.
The wind that cut through the Canadian Rockies that February evening carried more than just snow and ice. It carried a warning I should have heeded years before. I'm William Carter, 65 years old, retired literature professor from Toronto, widower for 13 years, and on that frigid night, I was about to discover just how far a father would go to protect his daughter. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. I stood on the expansive deck of the Morrison family's palatial ski lodge near Banff, watching my daughter Sarah move through the great room like she was walking on eggshells. She poured expensive scotch for her husband Derek and his father Richard, laughing at their crude jokes about city folks who couldn't handle real winter. But her laugh, oh God, her laugh sounded so hollow, so rehearsed, like a child who'd memorized lines just to avoid being punished. The Morrison Lodge was grotesque in its extravagance. A massive timber structure clinging to the mountainside like some monument to excess and arrogance. Those floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the valley below, and everything inside screamed money spent without an ounce of taste or warmth. Mounted elk heads with their dead glass eyes stared down at us. A stone fireplace big enough to stand and dominated the main wall. The furniture was all leather and steel, cold and uninviting, just like the family who owned it. I only came to these gatherings for Sarah. Every single time, she'd convince me with those same words. Dad, please come. Richard wants the whole family together. It matters to Derek. I knew it mattered to her. She so desperately wanted to believe she'd married into a real family, not this pack of wolves in designer sweaters. But looking at Richard's smug, self-satisfied face and Derek's perpetually mocking eyes, all I could see was a gilded prison. Richard and Derek had been drinking heavily since noon. Their usual veneer of civility had worn completely away, revealing the cruelty that lived underneath. They spoke too loud, gestured too wildly, and every movement radiated pure entitlement. They owned this mountain, this valley, this whole province, or so they believed. And Sarah? She was just another acquisition, a pretty trophy from Toronto, who should be grateful they'd elevated her station. Why's our little city girl, Sarah, bundled up like she's going to the Arctic? Richard bellowed, fixing my daughter with a heavy, judgmental stare. She wore a thick parka and snow pants. Sensible clothing for the severe weather advisory that had been issued that very morning. Just being cautious, Mr. Morrison, Sarah said with that nervous smile I'd grown to hate. The forecast said the storm's getting worse. Worse? Derek scoffed, mimicking his father's dismissive tone perfectly. My grandfather drove these roads in trucks with no heat. This generation's so soft, scared of a little snow. I felt this cold dread settling deep in my chest. I didn't like where this conversation was heading. It felt like watching someone sharpen a blade, slow and deliberate, savoring the anticipation. Leave her alone, I said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. My voice sounded foreign in that room, like an unwelcome intruder. Derek turned to me with this malicious spark dancing in his eyes. He'd always resented my presence, viewed me as an inconvenient reminder that Sarah had a life before them. William, relax. We're just having some fun, right, sweetheart? He winked at my daughter. Sarah nodded, forcing another smile that didn't reach her eyes. Of course, Dad. Everything's fine. But it wasn't fine. I saw Derek and his father exchange a look. Their special look. Predatory. Conspiratorial. It was how wolves look at prey before they strike. You know what would be fun? Richard suddenly announced, rising from his leather chair. His massive frame cast this long, threatening shadow across the hardwood floor. Let's see if Sarah can handle a real Canadian winter. Derek, get the keys to the old pickup. What are you doing? I stood up too, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might break through. We're going to take Sarah for a little drive up to Lake Louise Overlook, see if she can find her way back. Call it wilderness orientation. Richard laughed, and it sounded like gravel grinding in a blender. The roads are closed, I said firmly, my voice shaking now. Parks Canada issued a warning. There's a blizzard coming. Roads are suggestions, William, not rules. Not for us. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. Besides, it's only 20 kilometers. She'll be fine. She's always saying she wants to be more outdoorsy, right? They grabbed Sarah by the arms before I could react. She gasped in surprise, more from shock than fear. She still thought it was a joke, some twisted game. Derek, stop. Richard, let me go, she stammered, trying to pull away, but her protest dissolved into this nervous laughter. She didn't want to cause a scene, didn't want to appear weak or dramatic in front of them. They dragged her toward the garage while I followed, my bad hip screaming in protest with every step. Stop this right now. You're drunk. You don't know what you're doing. They ignored me completely. I was invisible to them, just an annoying buzzing sound in the background. They shoved her into the passenger seat of this old Ford pickup, the kind with no four-wheel drive and tires so bald you could see the wear bars. Derek climbed behind the wheel. Richard rode shotgun, and they roared out of the garage before I could even reach the door handle. I stood there in the driveway, snow already accumulating on my shoulders, and watched those taillights disappear up the mountain road into the gathering darkness. They were gone for 45 minutes. I spent every single second of it pacing that chalet, calling Sarah's phone, calling Derek's phone, getting nothing but voicemail over and over and over. The storm was building. Through those massive windows, I could see the snow intensifying, the wind howling through the pine trees like something alive and hungry. When I finally heard the truck return, I rushed to the garage. Derek and Richard stumbled out, laughing, actually laughing, slapping each other on the back like they just shared the world's funniest joke. Where is she? I demanded, my voice breaking. Where's Sarah? Richard wiped tears of laughter from his eyes. We left her at the fork about 15 kilometers up. She can walk back. It'll toughen her up, build some character. The blood drained from my face. Every drop. You left her in this storm? She'll freeze to death out there. Oh, calm down, William. Derek waved dismissively, already heading for the whiskey decanter like nothing had happened. She's got her phone. She can call a cab or something. There's no cell service up there. My voice cracked completely. And no cabs run in weather like this. Then I guess she'll have to walk. Richard shrugged his massive shoulders without a care in the world. Stop being so dramatic. She'll be fine. A little cold never hurt anyone. I didn't waste another second on them. I grabbed my coat, my keys, and ran to my rental car, a sensible Honda with proper winter tires. As I tore out of the driveway, I glanced to the rearview mirror. They were standing there in the garage doorway, drinks in hand, watching me go with these amused expressions on their faces. They had absolutely no idea what they'd just set in motion. Will Sarah survive the blizzard? What will William do when he finds her? The storm outside was nothing compared to the one about to be unleashed. The drive up that mountain was pure nightmare. Visibility dropped to maybe 20 meters, if that. Snow blasted horizontally across the windshield. My wipers could barely keep up with it. I drove hunched over the steering wheel, squinting into the white chaos, praying that I wouldn't miss her in the storm. 15 minutes up that road, I found her. She was lying in a snowbank on the shoulder, not moving at all. I slammed on the brakes, fishtailed to a stop, and ran to her. My hip buckled, but I didn't care. The pain meant nothing. She was wearing only her parka. No gloves. No hat. Derek and Richard had taken them, Sarah would tell me later, to make it more sporting. Her face was this pale blue color. Her lips were purple. Her eyes were closed. Oh God, she looked dead. Sarah, wake up. I shook her, but she was limp, completely unresponsive. I checked for a pulse and found one, weak and so slow. Severe hypothermia. I recognized it from the wilderness first aid course I'd taken years ago when we used to go camping as a family, back when my wife Margaret was still alive, back when the world made sense. I carried her to the car, laid her across the back seat, and cranked the heat to maximum. Then I turned around and drove like a man possessed back down that mountain. There was no cell service until I hit the highway. The moment I got a single bar, just one precious bar, I pulled over and dialed 911. I need an ambulance. My daughter has severe hypothermia. We're on Highway 1A, about 5 kilometers east of the Lake Louise turnoff. My voice was calm, mechanical. The panic had solidified into something else, something cold and hard and purposeful. While I waited for the ambulance, I sat in the back seat with Sarah's head in my lap, talking to her, begging her to hold on. Her breathing was shallow but steady. I ran my hands over her arms and legs, tried to restore circulation, terrified of what the cold might have done to her fingers and toes. Images flashed through my mind like a slideshow. I couldn't stop. Sarah at 6 years old, building a snowman in our backyard in Toronto, her laugh so pure and joyful. Sarah at 19, valedictorian of her high school, speaking with such confidence about changing the world. Sarah at her wedding 3 years ago, looking at Derek with such hope, such love, that I bit my tongue and smiled and pretended I couldn't see the way his family looked at her, like she was beneath them, like she was lucky to be there. The ambulance arrived in 14 minutes. Paramedics swarmed around her, connecting monitors, wrapping her in those thermal blankets, starting in 4-line. I heard fragments of their conversation. Core temp 32 degrees, frostbite on the fingers, possible respiratory complications. They loaded her into the ambulance, and I climbed in after her. I wasn't letting her out of my sight. Not now. Not ever again. The paramedic tried to object. "Sir, you'll need to." But something in my expression made him reconsider. "Okay, sir. You can ride along. Just stay out of the way." As the ambulance began its journey to the hospital in Calgary, I pulled out my phone. My fingers were steady now. The cold had left my body and settled permanently in my soul. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Thomas, my younger brother. We hadn't spoken in 9 years. Not since the Christmas when I told him his methods were too extreme, his obsession with justice too dangerous, too all-consuming. He'd been the best forensic investigator the RCMP had ever produced, but he didn't know when to stop, when to let things go. He destroyed his own career pursuing a case against a powerful mining company, a case his superiors ordered him to drop. He refused. They crushed him for it. Forced retirement at 51, pension reduced, reputation shattered beyond repair. He'd retreated to a cabin near Prince Rupert, making ends meet with private investigation work, writing anonymous exposés under pen names, living like a ghost. We'd fought bitterly about his choices. I thought he was throwing his life away on lost causes. He thought I was a coward who'd rather keep peace than pursue truth. Now I understood. Now I needed exactly what I'd once condemned him for. I pressed call. It rang 4 times. I was sure he wouldn't answer, sure he'd see my name and let it go to voicemail. But then his voice came on the line, gruff and suspicious. "Yeah, who's this?" "Thomas. It's William." A long pause. I could almost hear him straightening up, recalibrating. "Billy, he hadn't called me that since we were kids. It's been a while. I know. I'm sorry, but I need your help." "What happened?" I looked at Sarah's pale face, the oxygen mask fogging with each shallow breath, and felt something ancient and terrible stir in my chest. "They're heading back to Calgary right now, the Morrisons. They left Sarah to die on a mountain road in a blizzard. They thought it was funny." Another pause. When Thomas spoke again, his voice had changed completely. It was the voice I remembered from his RCMP days. Clinical, focused, dangerous. "Tell me everything." "Not now. When you get here." "But Thomas." I lowered my voice to a whisper. "Do what you do best." I hung up without waiting for a response. The old life was over. The William Carter who avoided conflict, who smiled at insults, who swallowed his pride for the sake of family harmony. That man died on a mountain road where my daughter almost lost her life. Have you ever had to make an impossible choice to protect someone you love? The hardest decisions often come in our darkest moments. Sarah was admitted to the Foothills Medical Center. Hypothermia, frostbite on 3 fingers, early-stage pneumonia from inhaling ice crystals. The doctor, this young woman who looked too tired for her age, said Sarah was lucky. Another 30 minutes in that snow, and she would have lost her hands. Another hour, and she would have lost her life. I sat beside her bed all night, watching the monitors, listening to that rhythmic beeping that confirmed she was still alive, still here, still mine. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just sat and planned. Around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed. A text from Derek. "Hey, hope Sarah got home okay. Tell her we're sorry if she got scared. Just a bit of fun." See you at brunch tomorrow. I stared at that message for a full minute, feeling something inside me break and reform into something harder, colder. Then I typed a single word, no. He tried calling. I declined. He texted again, more aggressive this time. Come on, William. Don't be dramatic. She's fine, right? No harm done. I blocked his number. What will happen when Sarah wakes up? And what exactly is Thomas planning? The storm on the mountain was over, but a far more dangerous storm was just beginning. The next morning, Sarah woke up. Her eyes fluttered open, confused and frightened, and I took her hand, the one without the frostbite damage. Dad, her voice was barely a whisper. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. She looked around the hospital room, taking in the 4 lines, the monitors, those sterile white walls that smell like disinfectant and despair. Memory flooded back and tears welled in her eyes. They just left me there, Dad. Derek laughed and said I needed to toughen up. He took my gloves and hat. He said it would be funnier that way. I squeezed her hand gently. I know, baby. I know. I called for help, but there was no signal. I tried to walk, but I got so tired. The snow was so deep, and I couldn't feel my feet anymore, and I thought. She broke down, sobbing. I thought I was going to die. I thought about Mom. I thought I was going to see her again. I held her while she cried, and in that moment, whatever restraint I had left dissolved completely like sugar in water. These people had nearly killed my daughter for sport. They treated her life as entertainment, as a punchline to their sick joke. And from Derek's message, they didn't even understand what they'd done. They would understand soon. Thomas arrived that afternoon. He looked older than I remembered. His hair had gone completely gray, and these deep lines were carved around his eyes like canyons. But those eyes were the same. Sharp, analytical, missing absolutely nothing. We met in the hospital cafeteria, away from Sarah's room, away from listening ears. I'm sorry, I said first, before anything else. For what I said 9 years ago. You were right. Sometimes the system doesn't work. Sometimes you have to go around it. Thomas waved off the apology like he was swatting a fly. Ancient history, Billy. Tell me about the Morrisons. I told him everything. The years of subtle abuse, the constant belittling, the way they'd isolated Sarah from her friends and family, controlled every aspect of her life. And then the mountain, the blizzard, the deliberate cruelty dressed up as humor. Thomas listened without interrupting, taking notes in this small leather notebook, the same kind he'd carried as an investigator. Richard Morrison, he said when I finished. I know that name. He owns Morrison Energy Solutions, right? Oil and gas, some mining interests. Made his fortune during the boom years. That's him. I never liked the smell of that company. Thomas tapped his pen against the notebook. Too clean, too perfect. In my experience, when something looks that pristine on the surface, there's rot underneath. Deep rot. What are you thinking? He looked at me with those predator's eyes. I'm thinking that men like Richard don't start being cruel at 63. They start early and get better at hiding it. I'm thinking that if we dig deep enough, we'll find something worse than a bad joke on a mountain road. How do we dig? Leave that to me. He stood up, tucking the notebook into his jacket. Take care of Sarah. Keep her away from them. And Billy. He paused. Whatever I find, it might get ugly. Are you prepared for that? I thought of my daughter's purple lips, her frozen fingers, that oxygen mask over her face. I'm prepared for anything. Sometimes the people who hurt us have been hurting others for far longer than we know. The question is, will we look away or dig deeper? Over the next week, Sarah recovered physically. Her fingers would heal with minimal scarring. Her lungs cleared, but the psychological damage ran so much deeper, like roots growing down into dark soil. She flinched at sudden sounds. She couldn't look at snow without trembling. And when Derek's name appeared on her phone, she would stare at it with this expression I couldn't quite identify. Somewhere between fear and dawning recognition, like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. Derek tried everything. Flowers delivered to the hospital, which I threw in the garbage before Sarah could even see them. A tearful voicemail about how sorry he was, how it was his father's idea, how he never meant for things to go so far, blah, blah, blah. Sarah listened to it once, then deleted it without a word. Richard took a different approach. He sent a lawyer, this sleek, expensive lawyer in a $2,000 suit who showed up at the hospital with papers and a practice smile that probably worked on most people. Mr. Carter, Mr. Morrison deeply regrets the unfortunate incident. He'd like to offer a settlement, a generous one, in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement and dropping any potential charges. I looked at the number on the paper. 6 figures. Enough to buy a nice house in Toronto, pay off debts, live comfortably. Get out, I said quietly. Mr. Carter, I really think you should consider. Get out now. The lawyer left, but I knew this wouldn't end with one visit. Men like Richard Morrison didn't accept rejection. They escalated, pushed harder, found new pressure points until they got what they wanted. It was the only language they understood. What they didn't understand was that I'd already escalated beyond anything they could match. Thomas called me on the 9th day. I found something, he said without preamble, without hello or how are you. Can you come to Calgary? I'm at the Delta Hotel on 9th Avenue, room 614. I left Sarah with a friend from Toronto who'd driven out to help and went to meet my brother. The hotel room looked like something from a crime documentary. Papers everywhere. Thomas had turned it into a command center, with photographs and documents pinned to the walls, connected by colored strings and sticky notes. Sit down, he said, handing me a coffee. This is bigger than we thought. Much bigger. He handed me a folder and began. 24 years ago, Richard Morrison had a business partner named Christopher Bennett. They co-owned a small exploration company, Bennett Morrison Resources. They were close friends, went to university together, built the business from nothing, were like brothers. What happened to him? Thomas's voice went flat. Avalanche. March 1998. They were doing a site survey in the Rockies. Just the two of them, no witnesses. According to Richard's statement, Christopher triggered an avalanche while crossing a slope. Richard tried to dig him out, but couldn't. By the time search and rescue arrived, Christopher was dead. That sounds like an accident. It does, doesn't it? Thomas pulled out another folder. But I tracked down the search and rescue volunteer who led the recovery team. He's retired now, lives in Kamloops. He told me something interesting. Christopher wasn't found where Richard said he'd be. Richard said the avalanche buried him on the slope, but the body was found at the bottom of a cliff 200 meters away from any slide activity. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter outside. He was pushed. The volunteer couldn't prove it. The official investigation was closed within a week. Richard inherited Christopher's share of the company. Within 6 years, it was worth $90 million. But there's more, isn't there? I could see it in his eyes. Thomas nodded grimly. Christopher had a wife and a young daughter. The wife, Jennifer, tried to challenge Richard's takeover of the company. She hired a lawyer, started making noise about how the partnership agreement should have given her Christopher's shares. 4 months later, she died in a house fire. The daughter went to foster care. The investigation ruled it an accident. Faulty space heater. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The scope of what Thomas was describing was monstrous, inhuman. I found the daughter, Thomas continued quietly. Her name is Amanda Bennett. She's 39 now, works as a nurse in Kelowna. She doesn't remember much about her parents, but she kept some of their belongings, including her father's journal from the months before the avalanche. Thomas handed me a photocopy of a handwritten page. The writing was cramped and urgent, panicked almost. Richard is trying to force me out. He's been meeting with investors behind my back, making promises we can't keep. When I confronted him, he threatened me, said I'd regret causing problems. I've documented everything. If something happens to me, the truth needs to come out. Christopher knew, I whispered, my voice barely working. He knew Richard was planning something. He knew, and he died before he could do anything about it. Thomas sat down across from me, his eyes hard as stone. Here's what we have, Billy. We have Richard Morrison, a man who likely murdered his business partner and possibly his partner's widow. A man who built his entire fortune on blood and ashes. And 24 years later, he's still doing the same thing. Using people as disposable objects, treating their lives as jokes, as entertainment. What do we do with this? We can't take it to the police. Not yet. It's too old, too circumstantial. Richard's got connections at every level of government. He's donated millions to political campaigns, hospital wings, charity foundations. He's untouchable through official channels. Then how? Thomas smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. We go public. We tell the story. All of it. Christopher Bennett, Jennifer Bennett, and now Sarah Carter. We show the pattern. We let the world see what kind of man Richard Morrison really is. And we let the court of public opinion do what the courts of law won't. That's what destroyed your career last time. Last time I didn't have proof. I had suspicions and hearsay and circumstantial evidence that fell apart under scrutiny. This time, he held up a USB drive. This time, I have Christopher Bennett's journal, scanned and authenticated by a handwriting expert. I have testimony from the search and rescue volunteer, recorded with his permission. I have financial records showing how Richard manipulated the partnership dissolution. I have photos of the settlement offer they made you, proving they know they're guilty. And I have Sarah's medical records and your sworn statement about what happened on that mountain. When do we release it? I've already written the article. I've got contacts at the Globe and Mail, CBC, and several investigative podcasts who specialize in this kind of exposure. They're ready to run it simultaneously, create maximum impact. But I wanted your permission first. Once this goes out, there's no taking it back. The Morrisons will fight with everything they have. They'll come after you, Sarah, me. It's going to be war. I thought about Sarah's face when she woke up in that hospital bed. The fear, the betrayal, the dawning understanding that the man she married had tried to kill her for a laugh, for amusement. Do it, I said. Burn them down. Burn it all down. Thomas nodded once. It goes live tomorrow morning at 6. I'll be at a secure location. I suggest you take Sarah somewhere safe. We said goodbye with a handshake that turned into a hug. 9 years of silence. And now we were brothers again, united against a common enemy, fighting the same fight. Will the truth be enough to bring Richard Morrison down? Or will his power and connections shield him one more time? Sarah's recovery was just beginning, but the real battle was about to start. I went back to Sarah's room and found her sitting up in bed, looking stronger than she had all week. There was color in her cheeks again, life in her eyes. "Dad," she said as I walked in, "I've decided something." "What's that, sweetheart?" "I'm filing for divorce, and I'm pressing charges. Assault, reckless endangerment, whatever sticks. I don't care if it makes headlines. I don't care if it embarrasses me or makes me look weak. They need to face consequences for what they did." I sat down beside her and took her hand. "I'm proud of you. So incredibly proud. And you should know, consequences are already coming. Bigger than you might expect." "What do you mean?" I told her about Thomas, about Christopher Bennett, about everything he'd uncovered. She listened with widening eyes, her face cycling through shock, horror, and finally this cold, grim satisfaction I'd never seen in her before. "They killed people," she whispered. "Richard killed people. Multiple people. And Derek knew, didn't he? All those jokes about his father being ruthless in business. He knew what it really meant. Probably. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her bandaged fingers. Then she looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was pure strength, forged in ice and fire. "Good," she said simply. "Let them burn. Let them all burn." The story broke at 6 the next morning. By noon, it was the biggest news story in Canada. Oil magnate linked to decades-old murders screamed the headline. CBC ran a special investigative segment. Twitter exploded. The hashtag Justice for Christopher started trending within hours, spreading like wildfire. I didn't see the Morrisons' reaction directly, but Thomas had sources everywhere, people who owed him favors. He called me with updates throughout the day. Richard's in full damage control mode. He's called every contact he has, trying to get the story killed, offering money, making threats. But it's too late. It's everywhere. Every news outlet, every social media platform. What about Derek? Panicking. He's apparently screaming at his lawyers, demanding they sue everyone involved for defamation. They're trying to explain that you can't sue for defamation when the story is true, when you have evidence. By evening, the story had grown exponentially. Other victims came forward, emboldened by the exposure. Former employees who'd been threatened into silence. Contractors who'd been cheated out of payments. A woman who claimed Richard had assaulted her at a company party 28 years ago and paid her substantial money to disappear, to never speak of it again. The dam had broken, and decades of buried sins came flooding out into the light. The next day, the RCMP announced they were reopening the investigations into Christopher and Jennifer Bennett's deaths. New evidence had come to light. A full review was warranted. The day after that, Richard Morrison was arrested. I watched the footage on the news with Sarah. Richard in handcuffs, being led out of his Calgary mansion. His face this mask of absolute disbelief. He'd spent his entire life believing he was untouchable, that money and power made him invincible. And now he was being touched very firmly by two uniformed officers who didn't care about his bank account or his connections. Derek was arrested separately, not for the historical crimes, but for his role in what happened to Sarah. Criminal negligence causing bodily harm. Assault. Abandonment. Leaving the scene of an emergency. The charges wouldn't carry the same weight as murder, but they'd be enough. They'd be something. Sarah watched the arrest from her hospital room. She didn't smile, didn't celebrate. She just watched with this quiet, exhausted relief washing over her face. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice small. "Not yet," I said honestly, because she deserved honesty. There would be trials, lawyers, probably years of legal battles. But the hardest part is done. The truth is out. They can't bury it again. They can't make it disappear. She nodded slowly, processing. "Dad, thank you for not giving up on me. For fighting when I couldn't fight for myself. You're my daughter. I'd fight the whole world for you. I'd burn down the sky if that's what it took." She started crying then, and I held her close, and we sat together in that hospital room while the news played footage of the Morrison empire collapsing in real time, brick by brick, lie by lie. Justice doesn't always come quickly, but when it comes, it's unstoppable. Have you ever witnessed the powerful finally face consequences? 1 month later, Sarah was discharged from the hospital. Her fingers had healed remarkably well, though the doctors said she'd probably have some sensitivity to cold for the rest of her life. A permanent reminder. The pneumonia was completely gone, and her physical strength had returned. But more importantly, something fundamental had changed in her spirit. That desperate need to please everyone, that constant anxiety about causing trouble, that fear of standing up for herself. It was all gone, replaced by this quiet determination I recognized immediately from her mother. I drove her home to Toronto, not to the Morrison Mansion in Calgary, not to that ski lodge in the mountains where nightmares lived, but to my small house near the university where she'd grown up, where she'd been happy once. Her old bedroom was waiting for her, unchanged since she'd left for university 16 years ago. "I can't stay here forever," she said as we pulled into the driveway. But there was no conviction in her voice. "Stay as long as you need, sweetheart. There's no rush, no pressure. This is your home." We spent that first week doing ordinary, beautiful things. Cooking meals together, watching terrible movies and laughing at them, taking walks by the lake. We didn't talk much about the Morrisons or the trials or what came next. We just existed peacefully in the eye of the storm, finding normalcy in the chaos. Thomas visited on the weekend. He looked different too. Lighter, somehow, like a weight he'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted off his shoulders. The Crown prosecutor says the case against Richard is strong, he reported, settling into the kitchen chair. Multiple witnesses coming forward now. Documentary evidence. And now that people aren't afraid to talk anymore, more testimony coming in every single day. Amanda Bennett is cooperating fully. She wants justice for her parents, even if it's 24 years late. "What about Derek?" Sarah asked quietly. "He's trying to cut a deal, testifying against his father in exchange for reduced charges. Apparently family loyalty only goes so far when prison time is involved." Sarah nodded, but didn't comment. The divorce papers had been filed weeks ago. She wanted nothing from a marriage. Not money, not property, not even an apology. She just wanted it over, wanted it erased. As Thomas was leaving, he pulled me aside in the hallway. "You know, Billy, I spent 9 years in that cabin, angry at the world, angry at you, angry at everyone who didn't care enough to fight for what was right. But watching you this past month, I realized I was wrong about something fundamental. What's that? I thought the fight was about winning, about destroying the bad guys, about revenge. But it's not, is it? It's about protecting the people you love. That's what I forgot. That's what made me lose myself. I thought about those words for a long time after he left. What will Sarah's future hold? And will justice truly be served? Or will Richard's money and power find one more escape route? The trials were just beginning. On a Sunday afternoon in early spring, Sarah and I went for a walk by the lake. The snow was finally melting, and these first hints of green were appearing in the trees, small miracles of renewal. She walked with her hands in her pockets, her face tilted toward the weak sunshine, soaking it in. "I've made a decision," she said suddenly. "Another one." "Another one?" I smiled at her. She smiled back, and it was a real smile, the first one I'd seen in months, that truly reached her eyes, that looked genuine. "I'm going to go back to school. Get my teaching certificate. I always wanted to teach, remember? Before I met Derek, before I decided that his dreams were more important than mine, that his family's approval was more important than my own happiness. I remember, you wanted to teach elementary school. You said you wanted to help kids discover that learning could be magical, could be fun. I did say that, didn't I?" She laughed, and the sound was like music. I think I forgot who I was for a while. Let myself become what they wanted me to be, what they expected. But not anymore. Never again. We walked in comfortable silence for a while. The lake was high with snow melt, rushing and tumbling over rocks. A pair of Canada geese floated past, completely unconcerned with human drama, living their simple lives. "Dad." "Yes, sweetheart. Thank you. For everything. For not giving up on me. For calling Uncle Thomas. For fighting when I couldn't fight for myself, when I'd forgotten how." I stopped walking and turned to face her, really face her. "Sarah, listen to me carefully. I made a lot of mistakes over the years. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken up. I smiled at people who didn't deserve my courtesy, my respect. I told myself that keeping the peace was more important than telling the truth. And I was wrong. So terribly wrong. I should have fought for you sooner. I should have seen what they were doing to you and stopped it before it got to that mountain road, before it got anywhere close to that. You couldn't have known it would go that far. Maybe not, but I knew they were cruel. I knew they didn't respect you, didn't value you. And I stayed quiet because I didn't want to cause problems, didn't want to make waves. I didn't want you to resent me for interfering." I shook my head. "That ends now. No more silence. No more swallowing poison to keep the peace. If someone tries to hurt you, tries to hurt anyone I love, I will fight with everything I have. Every single thing." Sarah hugged me then, right there on the lake trail, and for a long moment we just stood there, father and daughter, survivors of something terrible, looking towards something better, something whole. The trials went on for 2 years. 2 long, exhausting years. Richard was convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. He died of a heart attack 9 months into his sentence, alone in a prison cell, surrounded by people who didn't fear him, who didn't care about his money or his name. Derek received 4 years for his role in the mountain incident. He served 2.5 with good behavior and emerged a broken man. His fortune gone, his reputation destroyed, unable to find work or rebuild the life of privilege he'd once taken for granted, once thought was his birthright. I heard he moved to the States eventually, tried to escape the infamy, trying to outrun his past. I didn't follow up. He wasn't worth the attention, wasn't worth a single thought. Amanda Bennett received a portion of the Morrison estate, compensation for what had been stolen from her family, what had been taken. She used it to set up a scholarship fund in her parents' names, helping young people from difficult backgrounds pursue education, helping them escape cycles of poverty and abuse. I met her once at a memorial event for Christopher and Jennifer. She shook my hand and thanked me, though I told her the thanks belonged to Thomas, that he was the real hero in all of this. Thomas wrote a book about the case. It became a national bestseller, stayed on the list for months. He donated every penny of the profits to victims' advocacy organizations and returned to investigative journalism, this time with the support and resources to do it right, to do it properly. We talk every week now without fail. We never let 9 years pass in silence again. Never. And Sarah, oh, Sarah. Sarah finished her teaching degree at the top of her class. She teaches grade 5 now at a school in Etobicoke, not far from my house. She comes over for dinner every Sunday without fail. Sometimes she brings friends, fellow teachers, or former classmates. Sometimes she comes alone and we play cards or watch hockey or just sit in comfortable silence, just enjoying each other's company. She's dating someone new, a quiet man named Michael who works in environmental conservation. He's kind and thoughtful and patient. And when they're together, Sarah laughs the way she used to laugh before the Morrisons poisoned her joy, before they dimmed her light. I don't know if they'll last. I don't know what the future holds for them. But I know he treats her with respect, with genuine care. And honestly, that's all I ask. That's all any father can ask. I'm 67 now. My hip still bothers me when the weather changes, reminds me of that night. I volunteer at the public library twice a week and take evening classes in creative writing at the university. I'm writing my own story, not for publication, but for Sarah, for my grandchildren if I'm lucky enough to have them someday. A record of what happened and why. So they'll understand that fighting for the people you love is never wrong. It's never too much. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that evening on the mountain. The terror of finding Sarah in the snow, her lips that terrible purple color. The helpless rage of watching the Morrisons laugh as they drove away, treating her suffering as entertainment. That moment I pressed call on Thomas's number and committed myself to a path I couldn't turn back from, a path that changed everything. I used to believe that revenge was wrong, that it poisoned the soul. That forgiveness was always the higher road, the nobler path. I don't believe that anymore. What I did wasn't revenge. It was justice. It was protecting my daughter from people who saw her as disposable, as less than human. It was refusing to let evil hide behind wealth and respectability, behind expensive suits and political donations. The Morrisons thought they were untouchable. They thought their money and connections made them gods, free to destroy lives without consequence, without accountability. They thought wrong. They pushed my daughter into the snow and left her die, laughing all the while. But they didn't know my brother. They didn't know what we were capable of when pushed too far. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. This concludes the story of William Carter, a story about quiet strength awakened, a father's love unleashed, and the truth that sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or laws, but from ordinary people who refuse to stay silent, who refuse to look away. What do you think? Did William make the right choice? Could he have handled things differently, trusting a system that had already failed so many of Richard's victims, that had looked the other way for decades? Or was this the only path, the only way to protect his daughter and honor the memory of those who died in silence, who had no one to fight for them? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Perhaps you have questions about what happened to some of the characters. What do you think the future holds for Sarah and Michael? Will Amanda Bennett find lasting peace knowing her parents' killer faced justice, even if it came so late? And what about Thomas, the brother who came back from exile to fight one more battle, who found his purpose again? Write everything in the comments below. Let's discuss this story together, share our experiences, our thoughts. If this story touched you, please support our channel. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. Share your opinion, your reactions. Your feedback and participation mean everything to us and allow us to continue creating new, equally captivating stories for you. Which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments and see how far this story has traveled, how many lives it's touched. If you enjoyed the story, you can support us by sending a super thanks so we can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your kind support. It means more than you know. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new live stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on our channel waiting for you to discover. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next story.